In 1994, while a telephone rings loudly in another room, the television in the living room reports the death of Colombian's national player, Andrés Escobar. A woman picks up the phone and starts crying after listening to the caller. Then, we're shown a timeline of years past, where some people have been killed for several reasons. There's extreme violence, burning of cars, and blood on the floor in Medellin City. And finally, the screen stops in 1987 in Colombia, when a family has gathered for breakfast. After several calls for him, Andrés Escobar finally comes to the table with a bowl of ice. He places his feet on it, because his leg is inflamed. A toast is made to his brother Santiago, who's going to play for America, and Andrés gives him a scapular as a parting gift. On the field, Andrés does leg stretches while the others train. He watches as a player named Kike is scolded by the coach. Meanwhile, a dentist named Francisco is attending to a patient, but his wife Margarita walks in to tell him he has visitors. A patron called Agudelo has come to recruit Francisco as a manager, but the latter says he's not interested at all. Then we see a group of players practicing in an open space, when some cars suddenly show up and a shootout starts. Kike is present there, but he escapes with minor injuries because of his identity as a national player. Andrés Escobar is in the doctor's office, getting a report about his leg. His condition isn't getting any better, as it worsens anytime he runs. The doctor tells him the only way to recover is by quitting soccer. Kike is getting scolded by an older man, and apparently, Kike can no longer play soccer excellently. The older man tells him to at least earn his keep by working in a store, but he walks away. Francisco arrives at Agudelo's office and accepts the offer to be the club manager, but on the condition that he brings local players on board. Agudelo accepts and they clink glasses to it. Meanwhile, Andrés is in bed with his partner, and she tries to convince him to become a soccer coach instead, but he says the only thing he can and wants to do is play, even if it means taking painkillers for the rest of his life. Francisco clearing out his office when Margarita walks in. She isn't pleased with his decision to go back to soccer. Francisco assures her that he won't partake in their shady business, but she isn't convinced. Meanwhile, Kike arrives late to practice with a wound on his head. The coach tells him to get treated and leave, but he begs to stay and just watching. Francisco is in a meeting with the club's board. The men don't like the lineup of players, so Francisco asks for 5 matches to prove the team's worth or quit. We then see another player named René Aguida is eating breakfast with his grandmother, who's concerned about his safety, and Kike shows up to take him to the training. The players are selected, with Andrés and Kike standing by as substitutes, and the team loses the first game. René and Kike return home to find out that there's a party in their name. Due to his grandma's insistence, he and Kike join the party. Kike sees the headline in a newspaper and leaves the party without telling René. On his way home, he is stopped by a group of men. They ask about the shootout, and Kike says he couldn't recognize the assaulters as they wore masks. It's another day of practice, and Andrés is told to stand down even when he has a good chance with the ball. When the lineup is being called for the next game, Andrés leaves the room. His name is not on the list, so he stays home and listens to the commentary on the game. But the team lost another game. Agudelo speaks with Francisco after the game. He tells Francisco that the team has to win against America at all costs because it's now a war, and the losing team will be ousted. While playing a game with his daughter, Francisco realizes what he has been doing wrong, and at the next practice, he switches things up a bit. Andrés is told to lead the opponent to the offside of the pitch, creating holes in their defense, so that their team, Atlético Nacional, can slip in. Andrés gets kicked over a lot during practice, and his ankle starts to hurt. Kike doesn't make the list of lineups, and the coach tells him to stick with training. Andrés visits his partner at the hospital where she works, and asks her to get him painkillers. Over a call, his brother Santiago makes a bet with Andrés over the next game with America. Andrés and the other players receive envelopes containing a token from Agudelo, but Francisco is pissed about it. Before the game, Andrés takes the painkillers. René tells him that he must defeat his brother Santiago on the pitch. Kike is sad in his room. When the older man comes to tell him he has visitors, the men take him away to deliver unknown merchandise. Kike runs into the police while delivering the goods, but the police recognize him and let him pass. Then they meet up with the other guys in the gang, and Kike learns that the goods are illegal ammunition. The ringleader gives him a fat wad of notes as payment. Meanwhile, Rene scores a goal for the team, as he is known for scoring directly from free kicks and penalties. America loses the game, and Santiago walks away with a sullen face. Francisco hurries off to look for Agudelo after the game, but he didn't come to see the game. He types a letter on a typewriter, and goes to hand it to Agudelo. He sees office attendants clearing out his office, and when he asks why, he is told that Agudelo was found dead. He was murdered the same way as the club's vice president. We then see a report of his death, and the suspicion of America de Cali in the act. Andres wakes up to a congratulatory call from Santiago, but Santiago refuses the invitation to dine at home from Andres. The police are investigating Coach Francisco, and they inform him that the attack was a direct order from Cartel Cali. All the players and the coach are to gather for Agudelo's funeral. Meanwhile, Kike gets into a fight with the older man he's living with. At the funeral, a woman approaches Francisco and says she will be taking over control of the club. She tells him not to think of resigning even when Francisco insists. Kike gets released from prison because he battered the older man and got thrown into jail. The ringleader, who is called John, pays for his freedom and tells him not to go home again. Back in the club, the new manager has a son with Down syndrome called Gabito, and Rene is talking about his future with a girl he's flirting with. They talk about his grandmother and the possibility of her moving houses. Kike is given a room without a mattress to sleep in, and John tells him not to enter a locked door no matter what. At practice, Francisco addresses the players about the plan, but Andres finds it hard to run fast. We then are shown the team on a plane, traveling for the tournament. Francisco's assistant Hernan tries to convince him to change the plan, but Francisco insists that he won't. He explains that it's better they underestimate them, and then they take advantage of that. The match then ends in a tie. Andres finishes a bath and takes a look at his leg. A man asks him if he's okay, and Andres answers in the affirmative. The club manager tells Francisco that they can't keep getting ties, and she complains about press commentary. Francisco says he doesn't care about commentary, and all he is worried about is the outcome of his team. After a while, Andres congratulates his partner at the hospital. She has less than a year to spend there. Andres tells her that his pain has gotten worse and that he needs strong painkillers, but she gets upset and walks away. Kike hangs out with John in a bar. He gives him 2 jerseys, one for John and one for the boss. The team's bus arrives for practice, and Kike comes in a jeep. Rene asks him why, but he avoids the question. On the practice pitch, Kike turns violent on Andres after a mistake. He then is left alone in the room with a gun. In the locked room, a man inside tells Kike to let him out. He says his name is Rahul, and he has a lot of money. He begs Kike in the name of God, and Kike begs him to keep quiet, and the guard comes into the room right after. Meanwhile, Andres takes an overdose of regular painkillers. The man from the locker sees him in the hall and glances at his legs. On the field, Andres starts losing it. The overdose has started to get to his brain, and his team loses the game to the opposing one. The club manager tells Francisco to buckle up and talk to the team. Kike dials a number at a random telephone booth, and the receiver calls for Rahul. Kike then hangs up. Francisco is discussing Andres' performance with Hernan. The man from the locker tells Francisco that Andres has crooked feet, and that's what's giving him problems. He provides another shoe pad made by his own father as a solution for Andres. They try the shoe pad on Andres, and it feels better. Another player suggests that Andres meet a massager who would apply ointments on the area. The next day, on his way out of the house, Rene sees a note at the doorstep with a bill on it. At the hotel, Kike dials a number and listens to the receiver threaten to find him. He then hangs up again. Meanwhile, Andres' partner gives him a watch and asks him if she can sleep in his room with him, but he refuses. Francisco and Hernan talk about Andres' potential and how he will go places. Match day arrives, and the senator asks the club's manager if she distributed the incentives, but she says not yet. The game is a tie with only a few minutes left until the game is over. Francisco then signals to set the plan in motion. All the players go into the box of the other team in preparation for the the corner kick. Andres knocks the ball into the net, and they win. Later in the guarded room, Kike watches that the locked door has been opened, and there are blood stains on the ground. Francisco confronts the club manager about the car gifts to all the players, and she tells him that he would be the coach of the national team. Andres and Renee have arrived at the massager's home, and Andres forgot to wear blue underwear, as he was told. During the ritual, they're given a statue of a saint as a good luck charm. The next match ends in a tie, while the charm is lighted up. At practice, the club's manager shows up to inform Francisco that the venue for the championship had been changed. Andres is having breakfast with his family, and Santiago gives him the scapula, saying he needed it most. Kike fails to net the ball during the penalty, but Renee and Andres save the day, and their team wins the game at last. We then know that the club manager's name is Leonor. When she suddenly sees a man standing in the doorway, he tells her to follow him, and she does so. In a car, an older man tells her the boss is coming for all that is his. Leonor goes home and phones Santi, and says they're in the same boat. A group of street goons turns towards a taxi that has pulled up beside them. Renee steps out of the taxi, and they approach him. They ask him about the note with the bill, and he tells them off. Meanwhile, Leonor is still sequestered by the goons. She phones the senator, and he tells her that they already killed the governor, so his hands were tight. Francisco arrives at Leonor's house for a meeting where he explains his plans for the team, and they also request a change of venue. Later at practice, Francisco tells the team about his appointment as coach for the national team and their elevation as the backbone of the national team. Leonor is working in the living room when the maid walks in to tell her that Gabito is in an emergency. The goon outside helps her take the kid to the hospital and shakes up the nurse at the counter when they try to delay them. Kike meets up with John, who gives him bags of cash to store at the apartment, and Kike refuses because of a curfew, but John explains that only Kike can do the job. At the hospital, Gabito is stable. Leonor tells the goon to take her to his boss. He tries to refuse, but she insists. Kike returns to the apartment to find a wild party going on. He then takes the money into a secret compartment in the closet. Meanwhile, Leonor has arrived at the boss's house. He tells her about the debt that the sponsors of the club owe him, and he promises to take the surveillance off Leonor because she was brave enough to show her face. He also promises to give her some time to gather the money she needs, even when she tries to protest. On the news, 19 Cali players were killed by members of the Medellin cartel. The shooters were after the sponsors of the rival club, who were on the pitch that day. Meanwhile, at a press conference, Francisco calls out the list of players for the national team to play in Italy for the World Cup, and Kike doesn't on the list again. At his house, Andres is hosting a party, and Santiago is away playing for his club. Kike shows up with John at the party, and Andres welcomes them. Kike gets mad when he learns that the coach is around. He throws a fit and gets dragged out of the area. Renee gets home to see his grandmother crying. Apparently, the street goons barged into his home and locked her up in the bathroom to shake her up, and they also took all their properties. Renee rushes to the rooftop and exchanges words with them. Leonor is meeting up with the board member, and she informs him that she wants to sell some players, but he advises her against it because the only available buyers are their enemies, and the only option is for her to give her players publicity. Andres' name sits at the tip of Leonor's tongue, and the first publicity hits Andres' doorstep. While Andres answers more questions, his father goes out to get some snacks. The interview continues until a bomb suddenly explodes outside, and Andres runs out to look for his father. Luckily, his father walks in unscathed but definitely shaken, and the reporters rush out to get more coverage of the incident. Meanwhile, Renee is reporting his security issues to the coach. He says he's worried and scared. The coach advises him to report to the police and gives him a card from the investigators. Renee meets up with one of them and is told that he either presses charges or exterminates them. But Renee decides to leave things as they are. Together with his grandmother and his girlfriend, Rene checks out a new house. It's bigger than the one in the hood, and looks safer too. But his grandma tells him that she feels strange energies from the house. It seems that he is also the next hit for publicity, and he shows off his scorpion moves to the delight of the reporters. The national team wins the away game against Italy. They then qualify for the World Cup and are on a plane. Leonor is asking to sell players again, and Francisco says it's impossible. He tries to find out why she's so keen on selling players, but Leonor gives nothing away. Meanwhile, Kike's good time with his girl is interrupted when the goons barge in to get weapons. Andres' dad is mad at him for returning late. He informs him that the referee Alvaro was shot dead, and Andres is shocked. Francisco cheers the team up at practice, while Kike gets into a new club called Enjavado. Meanwhile, Leonor meets up with the boss's right-hand man. She tells him she doesn't have cash. He tries to make her scared, but Leonor dusts it off. On the news, a plane was blown up nearby, and it causes a delay in the national team's flight. On the flight, Andres realizes that he has forgotten his insoles, but a friend called Rat promises to solve it as soon as they land. The next day, Francisco's sleep is disturbed by a call. The unknown caller congratulates him and refuses to spill their identity. During practice, Leonor talks to some men about Andres, and at that moment, his legs act up. An expert tells Andres that he can't play the next day because he's got a second-degree sprain. But Andres is stubborn. He settles for the option of getting anesthesia before playing the next game and refuses to sit it out. Leonor tells Francisco that she has finalized negotiations with European buyers for Andres. It's match day, and the expert administers anesthesia on Andres. Despite their efforts, the team lose the game. Meanwhile, Kike gets upset that the team have lost the game. He leaves to get dinner, while his lover stays home. When Kike is out, she opens the secret compartment. Kike walks into his bedroom to see that his girl Clara has poured all the money onto the bed. He sends her away, but she blackmails him with her love for him, and he gives in to her demands. Rene returns to find out that his grandmother has returned to the hood, and tells him that she's safe there now. It seems the goons that troubled Rene got destabilized by another group, and Rene agrees to let her stay there. The players are returning from practice when Leonor meets up with them, and she drags Andres to one side. He says his recovery is underway, and she informs him that he's been sold on loan to Switzerland's The Young Boys. Meanwhile, Kike buys a car with the money. He and Clara ride off with the car, happier than ever. Andres hangs out with his girl Pamela and others. They give him several pieces of advice concerning Switzerland, and tell him not to trust anyone. Rene sees Kike and the new car when he shows up for practice the next day. He asks if he's doing okay and where he got the car from. Kike says it's a reward, but Rene mentions that Kike's team hasn't won anything yet. Kike brushes it off and asks if Rene could coach him on free kicks and penalties. Rene then agrees to it. In his room, Andres is packing up with Pamela's help. She tells him she wouldn't accompany him to Switzerland, since she is close to wrapping up her studies at Columbia. She tries to explain it to him, but Andres gets upset and continues packing. Rene teaches Kike some tricks on free kicks on a sandy field, and while they practice, a group of young boys gathers to watch them. The boys then join in, and they all have fun kicking the ball around. Andres leaves for his flight, albeit emotional. Meanwhile, Leonor is feeding Gabito when uniformed men barge into the house. The senator steps in after them and presents the chief in command Bastidas. Apparently, they got information about Leonor's involvement with the cartel's boss. Leonor denies the allegations and answers a call from Gabito's doctor. But the caller is actually Pablo Escobar, the Medellin cartel boss. He tells her not to say a word and reminds her of her promise to bring him money soon. Due to the presence of the police, Gabito is having a difficult time. Back in Switzerland, Andres is training on an empty field. He asks when he will get to play soccer, and the coach says they're watching his injury. Andres takes a moment to rest, and that's when they notice the insoles he's wearing. They take it away saying it isn't orthopedic. At the bank, Leonor is asking when the money from Switzerland would come through, and the attendant only has excuses. She flares up and promises to withdraw every cent she has in the bank. Kike is reading a headline about the Medellin cartel. He gets upset with the loud music that playing outside the room. He tells Clara off for playing that music every day, and she walks out with her friends. While the players line up to enter the pitch, a member of the opposing team pisses Andres off and repeatedly asks Andres for cocaine. Leonore's with the board member again. She's still complaining about money, and the man asks her if the money from Andres isn't enough. She then says it isn't, and he tells her to take care of herself. Andres talks to Pamela over the phone and tells her about the incident before the match, and he requests her to come over, but she avoids the question and hangs up. On a plane to their next game, Francisco and Hernan discuss Andres' absence. The team members talk with a spiritualist and the possibility of other teams having supernatural powers. Leonore gives the goons some money for the boss, and he warns her of wasting time. Andres welcomes them to Italy after some publicity with reporters. Kike is watching the game with Clara. Their joy is interrupted when a call from John comes in. John tells Kike that he's on the way to get the money, and they start selling everything they have bought with the money, but they can only get a few million pesos back. While watching the next game, the news comes on about John's death. Clara criticizes Kike for getting scared, and he slaps her. Kike tries to get the money from the apartment, but everywhere is swarmed with cops. He returns to his apartment and tries to persuade Clara, but another man called Una and his men show up. They demand the money John gave to Kike, but he doesn't have it. Clara puts the whole blame on him for saving herself. On the pitch, things are not looking good for Colombia. The commentary is bad for them, and the crowd seems to have given up on them. Francisco ignores the heat and stands to cheer the team. Things turn around and Colombia ties the scores. Their next opponent is Cameroon. Francisco makes the formation while giving Renee special instructions. Kike complains to Clara about having no money, and she warns him not to ever touch her again. Another player named Conconro steals candles from the church to light up the charming doll. Andres rebukes him and makes him put out the candles. The next day, the team loses the game against Cameroon. Rene gets unsavory questions from the press due to his mistake on the pitch. The team returns to Colombia, and Andres watches the news of Pablo Escobar with his father. Apparently, the criminal turned himself into the police. In her office, Leonore receives a call from the cartel, and Pablo orders her to bring the team to La Cathedral. She tries to tell him that it's impossible, but Pablo, who has supposedly turned himself in, makes her understand that he is not asking a favor, but giving her an order, and he then hangs up. Leonore then puts the team on a bus, headed for La Cathedral. When Andres asks her about the coach and the kind of match, Leonore lies that the coaches wait at the venue, and that it is a benefit match. All the players except Rene showed up. Leonore instructs a subordinate to make sure Rene doesn't show himself to the press on his way to La Cathedral. At a toll gate, Andres recognizes the road that leads to La Cathedral. He asks Leonore and she confirms that is the location and that it is a friendly match for the prisoners. Andres says he won't play, but Leonore tells him to go ahead and explain that to the cartel. Rene sees some reporters and stops to answer their questions. The secretary reminds him that he isn't supposed to speak to anyone, but Rene insists that he has nothing to hide. At La Cathedral, the team is given two instructions. The first is to play like professionals, and the second is to make sure they don't win against La Cathedral occupants. The game starts, and the Cathedral team plays a lot of foul moves. The referee ignores it and only blows the whistle when Greenery makes a mistake. The game ends, and sure, the Cathedral team wins. Andres and his team return to their homes, and he tells his dad about Kike's attitude toward the boss. Kike plays for Cathedral, and gets a wad of notes after the boss promises to hire him. The press time Rene had before getting to La Cathedral has gone viral, and it's a total mess. Leonore denies sending any player there before the press, and promises that Rene's involvement with La Cathedral would be investigated. Francisco asks her if she knows what she's doing, but she defends herself, saying she's protecting the club's interest. Francisco then quits his job as a coach. Kike gets a new house and car from the boss, and Clara tells him to sell it. But he says he will remain faithful to the one who's helped him. Hernan appoints Andres as captain in order to unite the team, and the team seems to be under tension since the game at La Cathedral. The next match has a bad taste for Andres, because his injury gets really bad on the field and he's carried away. He gets surgery, and the doctor tells him his recovery will take 8 months. It means he won't make it for the World Cup games. Meanwhile, the boss throws a party in Kike's name. Right in front of Kike, the boss starts flirting with Clara. He gives him a starch of notes, and gives Clara a separate one. When they are leaving, Kike queries Clara for doing nothing when the boss flirted with her. Pablo has escaped from prison, according to the news. Leonor phones the senator and tries to quit, but he tells her that his daughter has been kidnapped. In the meantime, we're shown the senator talking to Rene about his kidnapped daughter. Kike comes home to see that Una and the goons need Clara on some mission, and he gets angry about this. Rene gets a chance to speak with Pablo, and he asks about the girl that was kidnapped. Pablo agrees to let her go on the condition that the senator pays all he owes. Andres is checking out a house with Pamela. On his way back from practice the next day, Rene sees a little girl in his back seat. She tells him some men put her there, and told her someone would take her home. Rene takes her to the senator, and he is overjoyed. Meanwhile, Kike is watching a game in his apartment when the police barge in and arrest him. He then finds out that Clara snitched on him. The police ask him for the boss, and Kike says he doesn't know where he is, so he is arrested and thrown into prison. Andres shows up at practice and tries to lie to Hernan to get back into the team, but it backfires. His doctor already briefed Hernan on his recovery progress, and Hernan tells him to give it time. He then assures Andres that he has a lot of years ahead of him to play soccer. Another day, Andres shows up for practice and finds the field swimming with cops. Hernan tells him that the cops arrested Rene on suspicion of kidnapping. Andres then storms Leonor's office, and he asks her what she's doing to help Rene, and she says nothing, and leaves the office angrily. After asking her to imagine what had happened to Gabito, it is time for the elimination round of the World Cup, and the team is playing against Argentina. Andres goes to watch the game with Rene in prison. They set the TV up so that the other inmates can watch too. Soon after, Kike is let out too, so that he can see the game. Andres asks Kike about his case, and promises that they will play together on the team again. Kike says Clara blamed everything on him, so he has 30 years with no immunity on the counts of terrorism and weapon trafficking. The national team is winning against Argentina. The prison gets noisier as the goals pour in, and by the 5th goal, the officers can no longer contain the crowd. They take Andres away and take Kike somewhere else that isn't his cell. They also take Rene away, but we're not shown the particular cell. Andres calls for Rene and Kike as he's being dragged away, but the officers don't stop. Some prisoners are let free, and they enter Kike's cell and stab him severally until he dies. On the news, Pablo Escobar and Una have been gunned down by policemen, and the people of Colombia are celebrating this great feat. Their country can now have some peace after all these years. Andres is throwing a party to celebrate the new year in his new apartment, and hopes to be able to play for the club in the new year. Rene is set free from prison. He then meets up with Coach Francisco, hoping to get back on the team, but the latter tells him to focus on building himself for now. He goes to the police station for clearance, but finds out that he can't leave the country yet, since some charges are still pending, and this means that he'll miss the World Cup. Andres is still subjecting his legs to some stretches, because he's too scared of getting injured again. He shows Pamela a new shoe with inbuilt insoles that will help his leg, and tells her to feel the insides, and when she does, she feels a box and pulls it out. In the box is a ring, and she says yes to Andres' proposal. Meanwhile, the players are in a showroom, doing one thing or the other for publicity. Leonor complains that the team needs to start resting up for the games, and instructs her secretary to call the senator to demand 6 more games instead of 3 with the Europeans. Rene is watching Andres' ad on TV when his grandmother informs him of a visitor. The visitor is Andres, and he takes Rene to see Kike. At the gravesite, he tells Rene not to feel down, but to continue to prove himself, and his words comfort Rene a lot. Andres receives a call that he'll be going to Italy after the World Cup. His father and Pamela are overjoyed. Now we are in 1994, and the team arrived in the US for the World Cup. Leonor attends a meeting with the senator and other patrons, and they give her a gift that makes her worried, so she then leaves abruptly. Andres is worried about the other players, especially Freddy. He goes to check on him when the latter misses dinner. Freddy locks himself up because he's scared of some witchcraft. He tells Freddy about his own knee that starts to hurt as soon as he is about to make the big game. When it's lights out, Andres sees some players taking girls into their rooms, and he laughs it off. On match day, the team wears blue jerseys against Romania. The boys lose the first half, leading 3-1. Two players get into a heated argument in the locker room, but Andres gets in between them. Francisco addresses them right after the match, something he's never done. He then scolds them for playing blame games. At dinner, the players' families show up and they're overjoyed. Meanwhile, Francisco reads a message on TV, and it's a threat for killing his player Barabbas. He tries to find out how it got there, but no one can help him. In the locker room, Francisco gets rid of the reporters and tells Barabbas that he can't play or he will die. But in fact, the entire team will die if he plays. And he tells them about the threat. Andres says he won't play if Barabbas won't, but Barabbas pulls out before the matter can get complicated. In the first half, Andres scores an own goal. It is just a goal, but it will ruin everything. Unfortunately, the match ends with the United States leading 2-1. Andres locks himself up, unwilling to speak to anyone, but the coach comforts him. At a press conference later, Andres admits his mistake and promises to do better. They win the next game, but they didn't score enough goals to remain in the tournament, and they get knocked out of the World Cup. Francisco advises them to not return to Colombia until the heat dies down at least. Andres's family tells him to stay back and travel around with them. They then assure him that the failure of the team wasn't his fault. He says that he has to go back to help Pamela with the wedding preparations and just show his face, and says he will take some interviews and bring Pamela back with him. Some reporters interrupt them and take Andres away for an interview. On his way from the airport, the taxi driver reassures Andres that he's amazing. He advises him not to pay attention to anything, and Andres appreciates him for his kind words. He is back home with Pamela and making some dinner for them. Pamela says that she didn't know he knew how to cook, and they laugh over it. She scolds him for not picking up the phone when he was away, but he says he couldn't call anyone after the match. They quarrel over it, but Andres assures her that she wouldn't have understood, and says it is better to be alone after this type of matches. Later, Andres confides in Renee, and the latter assured him that he understands his situation better than anyone else, and he hangs out with friends at a bar. He gets into some arguments with some drunk men on his way out to get hot dogs. The men keep taunting him about his mistake on the pitch. Andres makes it out of the bar and gets into the car. The men show up again and start an argument. They want Andres to step out of the car, and he refuses. They keep going back and forth until one of them pulls out a gun and shoots Andres. And we are shown the same scene from the beginning, where the woman who picks up a call and starts crying is Andres' sister. Pamela gets the call too, and Leonor as well. His friend Renee shocked when sadly knows Andres Escobar is dead. Thanks for watching, take care, and see you in the next video.
Back in my bag and I gotta brag, I do this shit for real. When we was down and we had nothing, we had to share a meal. We put the shit in overdrive with no steering wheel.